Well, we move now to a next conversation, and this really builds up to where it is that we headed in the latter part of this afternoon, focusing on youth employment and how best it is that we need to cultivate and grow an environment where youth education not only translates into a demographic dividend, but highly also performs strongly in terms of economic performance for South Africa, but also unlocking the human potential of individuals who can really bolster South Africa to new levels of social equality. To give us more insight into this conversation, where it's well witnessed that South Africa has an unemployment crisis specifically focused on its youth, Anne Bernstein, who's the Executive Director at the Centre for Development and Enterprise, joins us now to provide an overview into the situation and, most importantly, some recommendations that we need to consider to address and source solutions to this particular matter. Ladies and gentlemen, Anne Bernstein.
Well, hello, everybody. I'm delighted to be part of this platform today. I'm going to talk a bit about how to think about unemployment in South Africa and then what not to do and what we should do. So South Africa has the world's deepest unemployment crisis. After 2 decades of presidential summits, of government initiatives, of private sector projects, of NEDLAC debates, job summits, before COVID, in January 2020, we had 10 million unemployed people, and this with COVID will probably at today be at around 12.5 million people who are unemployed in this country. We're a complete global outlier in terms of the depth of our unemployment situation. If you turn to youth unemployment, the situation is even worse. I think it's catastrophic. Before COVID, if you were aged 15 to 34 years, you were 54% unemployed. 15 to 24 years, you're over 70% unemployed. So between 2008 and 2019, the number of young people employed fell by more than 500,000. So fewer young people were employed today than they were 10 years ago. This is absolutely stunning. Now, the realities of South Africa is that the economy before COVID was growing much too slowly to expand employment. And the jobs we generated were mainly for more skilled people. Too many young people have no experience of the world of work. They have poor education, generally through no fault of their own. They come from households or communities where nobody works, and they often live in remote places with no economic prospects at all. The costs of employing young people in South Africa are too high relative to what they can produce, and there is a reasonable expectation that the cost of employment will only go up. So for many employers, perhaps most, the question they ask is, why should I hire young people? Now, there are 2 popular forms of intervention favored by the private sector and many in government as well. The one is, people say we must help more young people become entrepreneurs. And in our view, after considerable analysis, after talking to people throughout the country, after looking at the international experience, we would say this is a very bad strategy. Young people with no experience of work, who come with bad education, often live in remote places, to look at them and say, you should become entrepreneurs, is to set them up to fail. The other favorite intervention is what you might call pathways for young people. And this can help people learn how to present themselves for a job. It can help them understand how you look for a job, how you prepare for a job interview, all good things. So you can help young people get into the queue for jobs. You can help them get to the front of that queue. But unless that line is getting shorter and shorter, we're not making much progress. South Africa's addicted to special interventions, to summit projects, to all sorts of things that we think should not be the priority. The truth is that the most sustainable, the most expandable projects that South Africa should be thinking about are called firms. Now, I'm often asked by people on the radio, on television, wherever I go, everybody in South Africa wants to somehow put jobs in this corner and growth in another corner. And the truth is that as a society, we avoid and circle around the only real solution to youth unemployment. We have to get millions and millions and millions more young people into employment. How do we do this? Well, we have to change our economy. We need much faster growth, even before COVID, and even more so now. And we need much more labor-intensive growth. We have adopted a strategy for many years that favored high-skilled, high-wage approaches to development. And this has failed demonstrably for many millions of people. So that's the first thing, faster, more labor-intensive growth. Secondly, this country has failed to build a skilled workforce for a very long time, for 50, 60 years. And this democratic government has not improved the situation in any significant way. It's long past time that we dealt with the failure of our education system. We have a very low performance basic education system, and the issue is not money, it's getting value for money. We also need to think much harder about our vocational training system, where it's very expensive and it's not working well. So the two areas, absolutely vital to young people, where so many people are let down by this society, need to be sorted out. And then we've got to, once we have jobs in our economy, we have to find ways to connect young people to jobs. Better transport, urban transport, better information, much better knowledge of the job market. Now, the wrong approach is exactly what we've been doing. We avoid big reforms, fundamental reform to our economy and society. We focus too much attention on initiatives and ad hoc projects, none of which can reach the scale required, and we divert energy, resources, and leadership to the wrong things. The result is that unemployment keeps deepening. We are advocating a new approach to the jobs crisis, where policy reform is top of the list of priorities. And as I've said, we've got to increase the rate of growth, which needs a whole set of reforms of its own. And we have to make this economy much more labor intensive, which also requires reform to the collective bargaining process and other things. And we must stop avoiding this. We keep pretending we're going to deal with the job situation by avoidance. Nothing else but reform and growth will help South Africa deal with the scale of our unemployment challenge. And the key fundamental principle that I think many South Africans have to accept is that the big dividing line, the big cause of inequality, the big cause of lack of inclusion is that more than half of our society live in poverty, and we have a massive number, 12.5 million people unemployed. In this context, a low-wage job is a better first step than no job at all. So politically difficult decisions have to be taken. The country has to become serious about the ever-growing jobs crisis, and government, the president, has to change the terms of the national debate about growth and what's required, about inclusion and labor-intensive growth. And I think business can play a bigger role than it has in that respect. So the country requires leadership, political will, and astute political management. So what are our proposals for action? We have to stop tweaking at the edges, stop fiddling. The big issue for South Africa is scale and how to impact on scale. We need a new approach to the jobs crisis. We have to prioritize the reforms necessary for faster growth and for a much more inclusive labor market. We need to maintain and probably expand our public works programs, and they need some reform as well, but at least we're getting people something while we're fixing the economy and the labor market. We also have a detailed proposal for an experiment, a special economic zone for labor-intensive manufacturing. So let me end then with some thoughts for business very briefly. I want to repeat one of the most important things I ever learned about business and how to spend corporate money. Such a valuable asset for a society that is, in a sense, free money that can be spent on innovation. But the most important thing about this is to remember that however generous companies are with their social investment money, this is a tiny fraction. All the money business spends on education, less than 1% of our national education budget. So the key maxim to remember is that the very best use of private sector money is to influence how public money is spent. And in this context, when it comes to youth unemployment, business focuses much too much attention on projects, speaks far too much about projects, and spends far too little time on efforts and advocacy and research on how to promote fundamental reform to achieve growth and more effective labor markets. So there are lots of examples of what could be done in that sphere, but thank you. That's my 10 minutes up. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing those sentiments with us, and we really do appreciate some of the solutions that and ideas that you've tabled, and we will deliberate them in this upcoming panel discussion. But a big thank you for your time, much appreciated, and of course lots of feedback that we are seeing in the chat as well as Q&A service. Well, let's deliberate these issues. Growth, reforms, entrepreneurship, probably not the best solution, but making sure that somebody has an entry-level job is probably the best way to go. Big measures that we certainly need to implement in terms of ensuring that we lower the barriers to entry in terms of employment, and most importantly, alleviate the pressures that we have in the unemployed youth fraternity in South Africa.